he reached out his hand and he touched the man. I am willing, he said, be clean. So what's the deal? What's going on here? Firstly, it's talking about a man with leprosy. There is a physical and a social cost of leprosy in those days. And bear in mind that this word leprosy in those days actually indicated all kinds of skin conditions that seem to spread, and it's different to how it's defined medically today. It was thought at the time to be physically incurable. Only God could cure leprosy. That's what the understanding was at the time this account was written. This man will have been proclaimed unclean or leprous by the priest, the social and the religious leader of the society. And that was the highest sort of leadership. The priest would have seen it. It wasn't a doctor. It was the priest that said this one is unclean, and there were certain conditions that had to be fulfilled. It was believed that leprosy was highly contagious, and consequently anybody with leprosy had to live in isolation from their community. It separated them from the rest of their people. And Leviticus chapter 13 gives very specific instructions if somebody's found to be leprous. That person had to wear torn clothing, and they had to shout as they moved around, unclean as they moved around. They could not be near anybody for fear of the contagion. They had to live alone. They had to live outside the camp or the community. They were totally isolated from their people. The law protected the community, but it had no answers for the individual. The law could do something. It saw the community as more important. And here we have this man. He's been diagnosed, actually declared leprous by the priest. And he was set apart physically from his family, from his friends, from his network, from his community. There was no getting on his mobile phone, jumping onto Insta, having a Facebook chat, being able to communicate with people. He was completely isolated and alone. He was physically isolated, but there were spiritual consequences of leprosy we need to understand too in those days. He had to remain not just outside of his community, but he wasn't allowed to go to the temple. And we need to understand the importance, the significance of the temple in a Jewish context. The temple was the center of absolutely everything. It was the center of worship, the center of gathering. It's the place you went to every year to have your sins covered. Because the society realized, they understood that sin separated them from God. And so they had this one hope that they could bring a sacrifice to the priest every year, and the blood would atone for their sin every year. But this person with leprosy, he was banished from that presence. He wasn't allowed to go to the temple. He wasn't allowed to be in that place. So not only was he physically isolated, but he was spiritually isolated. There was no means for his sin to be forgiven. Can you think about the shame as well as the painful separation that this disease caused this person? It was thought that leprosy was as a result of somebody's sin in slander, or literally someone had an evil tongue. Even if he hadn't done it. We were talking today, just a little bit earlier, I think that's right, I think it's what to Pastor Mike about some people in Uganda, and they were coming across, visiting some of the prison out there, and how they were. You thought maybe half or 2/3 of the prison, the people you visit in prison, they were just completely innocent. Just because the Ugandan government needs to get its figures in order, it would just put anybody in prison, just whether they were guilty or innocent. Can you imagine? Can you imagine that you're in that situation? It's completely unjust, but there is nothing you can do about it. And it just may be that this person here, he's had this physical condition, and it's just a physical condition. But it's now spoken about and declared by the praise, well, it's because of your evil tongue. So, but I haven't done anything wrong. Doesn't matter. What's happened to your body is a testament against you. Can you imagine that? Just the tense, the anxiety, but that's not right. Those people that are in prison in Uganda, you can just imagine, this is not right, but there is nothing they can do about it. That feeling there is what this guy may well have been feeling. You see, he was a part of a society that said, well, if this happens to you, then that must be God's judgment. And he had to go with that line. And actually, at the beginning, chronologically of the Bible, God does a lot of writing to try and undo that very thinking. And we very easily go down this line. You remember the story of Job? Do you remember that story?
Yes.
Was this guy, he had everything, if you want to summarize it in a salva, he had everything, he lost everything, he said a few things, and he got it all back again. That's probably 42 chapters in about 14 seconds, okay? There's a very interesting thing that goes on there. You remember the story of Job where he's lost his family, he's lost his health, he's lost his wealth, he's lost his status. His friends come, the three guys, they sit down, they sit in Shiva with him, they rock backwards and forwards so they can feel his pain. That was a good thing. And then they begin this huge long debate about, well, come on, Job, just say sorry for what you've done, and then you'll be okay. Job says, no, that's not the reason that I'm like this. So no, it must be. It must be because you said something, done something, been there. It must be because of sin that you're like that. Just confess and you'll be okay. And Job says, that is not the reason I'm like, I have not done anything wrong that warrants this. In fact, I'll argue my case before God. Has anybody made it all the way through the book of Job? It's okay if you haven't. Go out. It's tough read. Because you've got this backwards and forwards for about 28 chapters. It must be because you did this, Job. No, I have not done that. I'll stand before God. Yea, though he slay me, yet in my flesh I'll declare my case before him. No. You must have done something. And then you get to the end of it, bearing in mind that up to Job 38, Job had no answer that Job 39 was going to come along in his life. He just stood there and says, it's not right. I know it's not right. And of course the story unfolds, and of course then we realise we get this sort of, at last, justice. Because we see this situation where God intervened. Job asked loads of questions, then Allah asked loads of questions back to Job. And he says he honours Job. And Job has to pray for his friends in case God decides to take him out. Okay.